So the first question was what has changed. The second one we've done 2A, which is what are the risks? And I like to call them 2A and 2B. 2B is the possible causes, and now here's where you finally get to talk about P.I.E.C.E.S. P.I.E.C.E.S stands for physical, so physical issues, I for intellectual, E for emotional, C for capabilities, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means. E is what's going on in the environment, and it's the social issues. When we look at these, what are the potential triggers, that might be occurring in each of these areas? Okay. So I want you to, on the front of your book is the wheel. So when we talk about pieces, and we're looking at the different initials, so the physical is the 5 Ds. The first one is delirium, and whether delirium is present as an explanation. Diseases, and we're talking about, is this a new illness? Is this a recurrence of a chronic illness? And third one is drugs, and reviewing the medications, what's new, what's old, do they still need it, what polypharmacy fits right into that perfectly. And then discomfort, and we again, pain is a huge underdiagnosed issue when we're talking about people who are living with communication issues or dementia. So that becomes incredibly important. And then disability, and Carol talked about the fact that, does the person have their glasses on? Do they have their hearing aid in? Do they have an appropriate seating? Is their wheelchair actually comfortable for them? Do they have the needs, the canes and walkers that they actually need to function? So that's the 5 Ds, and I use that actually in my, just so I don't miss things. Like, it's a very handy dandy, just have I overlooked anything? So I run through those 5 Ds. I stands for the intellectual changes, that's where the dementia piece, or looking at people's cognition, they may not actually have a dementia, they may have a bipolar illness, they may have mild cognitive impairment, but here's where we actually can help the staff to tease out what are the specific areas of challenge that the person's having with their cognition. And we talk about we talk about the 7 A's, and again, really helpful. And it's also a good memory test as you get older to make sure that you're not developing difficulties. If you can remember all the 7 A's, you're really good. So that's so amnesia, and we're, again, obviously looking at the short-term memory versus longer-term. Semantic versus procedural, but we don't have time to go into all of those things here. Aphasia, and this is huge, because oftentimes when people move into a residential care facility, they may have some expressive aphasia, which often tends to happen earlier on in Alzheimer's disease and certainly in frontotemporal dementias. But what happens over time, and this is what we miss, is now the person is having receptive aphasia as well. And as soon as you've got receptive aphasia, you'll have a lot of nodding and smiling because they can pick up on the emotional tone of language, but I haven't got a clue what you're actually saying. So staff will have learned that, that Carol likes it when I come in and I talk to her and I say, so Carol, we're going to do this now. Is it okay if I do this now? And Carol's nodding, yeah, it's fine. And then I go to touch Carol and she, because Carol didn't understand a word I said. And now it doesn't happen on and off like that, but as things change over time, if we're not reassessing, we might miss that the person is now having some receptive difficulties. And you'll see that communication is the key to so many of the behaviors that we see. Apathy, okay, so we don't get referrals for apathy that often in residential care. Why is that? They're not a problem. What does apathy look like in a residential care facility? I will invite you to come to the dining room or the living room. You'll sit in a chair, and then I'll go off and look after 14,000 other things. And I come back, and you're still sitting in the chair, and then I'll go and you're still sitting in the chair, and you've missed every activity going because nobody has noticed that you need me to help you initiate. Agnosia is trouble identifying things, and oftentimes we see this with misidentifying objects in the environment or people. Very stressful for families when people with dementia stop recognizing them. And they often will say, I don't need to come anymore because she doesn't know who I am. And one of the biggest things we can help families understand is she really needs you now, because although she may not recognize your face, she recognizes the energy. She recognizes the connection. She feels, reinforced. Apraxia is also one of those huge things when we're talking about people becoming upset during care or overwhelmed with care. Because apraxia is taking a complex task and being able to move through the steps with some kind of a facility. And people who have apraxia will often be able to do the individual steps, but they need the cueing through each of them. And sometimes they don't cue well with words because they get irritated. So it's figuring out how to cue them in a way that they will actually comfortably do what they need to do. So it may be that it's with words, or it may be with gestures, or maybe just quietly, handing them something, or something that cues them through the tasks. The challenge with apraxia is we're kind of an on-off group of healthcare providers. Well, the healthcare system. If you're able to, then you can do it. If you need help to be cued through, what often happens? We just do it for them. Yeah, we do it for them because it's more expedient, right? And unfortunately, what happens when we do it for them too early? They lose their functioning, right, more quickly. So that's why it's really important to recognize that people can be cued through an activity to help them do that.
Agnosia, it means having a lack of insight into one's challenges. So a person with dementia who's asked about memory impairment or whose difficulties are pointed out to them will often become very defensive because they lack the self-awareness that they're actually having difficulties. So anosognosia, simply put, is a lack of insight into our deficits.
Altered perception is the other one, and we were talking about the fact that contrasts in flooring often look like holes in the floor, and people will take giant steps over things that are like little door sills and that kind of thing, so altered perception, or altered perception being auditory or visual hallucinations. The emotional is the 4Ds. This is where we get into looking at disordered adjustment. When you're talking about people who have either come into hospital or are moving into a residential care facility, can often be a major time of adjustment for them because there's so many losses associated often with moving into a care facility. We could go through them, but we'll just move forward. Disorders of mood and anxiety, so making sure we're not missing depression on top of the other things that might be causing the behavior, looking at for evidence of psychosis, delusions, and then disorders of personality. So personality disorders used to be that we would see a lot more writing in charts, manipulative, personality disordered. We don't see that, thank goodness, as much anymore. And really, mostly what happens with people living with a dementia is there are very few people who actually have, full-fledged personality disorders. Many people, though, have strong personality traits that then when you have a disinhibiting illness like a dementia, it comes out. So you see more of it because of the illness that the illness that they have. So it's very important to distinguish between those because we still have a lot of stigma around the notion of personality disorders. So important to look at people's personality styles and then say, how is it being influenced by the illness that they're living with? The next area is capabilities, and in residential care specifically, you're really interested in their activities of daily living. Most of the people living in residential care are not looking after their instrumental activities of daily living anymore. So we're really interested in their abilities, and we want to know their abilities, not what we're doing for them. So sometimes, again, are we over-functioning for them, or are we under-functioning for them? We write a care plan one year, it may not get reviewed till the next, and a whole bunch of stuff has happened in between. And that is no longer fits, but we're all imagining we should provide the care the same way. So making sure we look at when behavior changes, what's the person really able to do? Then we talk about E is for the environment. We talked about the fact that stimulation levels can either be too high or too low. So it's really important to look at what the stimulation levels are like, and sometimes it might be part of the DOS. It happens in the dining room continually. Oh, isn't that interesting? That's an area of high stimulation. Or it happens around the nursing station at shift change. Oh, interesting. So again, stimulation level is really important. Changes in routine, and that will be changes in staffing, a move, anything that changes the person's regular patterning. Lighting, colors, and temperature. So cold bathrooms, we have so much physically responsive behavior in bathrooms. In bathing rooms, when people are having a bath, and those rooms are cold, and you're there in the nudie, So one of the big interventions is crank the heat up. And it's too hot for us. Well, then bring your shorts if you're going to be doing bathing that day for an older person. And the other thing is just making sure that blanket warmers, that's the biggest intervention in an acute care facility, is keeping people warm. So that's huge. And then looking at,
colors.
What's that? Colors, right. Okay, so contrast. And one of the challenges is people with dementia have a lot of trouble when there are two items that are close together that have similar hue, right? So we put a white plate on a white tablecloth, and they have trouble then identifying what's on the plate or that it is a plate. Or
Toilet.
White toilets.
Yes, a white toilet.
Cheaper.
Yep, white toilet on a white floor without any contrast, and then we wonder why they urinate in the dark toilet, garbage can. So those are the kinds of, sort of contrasting colors are very important. And then the final is, social and really talking about a person and their story and who's important to them and what has been happening throughout their life. So you want to know who's their life story, and we talked about trauma. You want to talk about who's in their social network. We want to know how their cultural heritage fits into the number of people who have had needs related to faith-based practices that we have missed or not respected, and they become very upset but can't tell us what the challenge is. So cultural heritage is really important. And then again, not to generalize that everyone who is this needs this, because they're still individuals. And then the caregiver factors, this is really important. Carol was not meant to look after me, because we have an energy that doesn't work together. But Carol looks after all the people on that wing down there. Well, that's too bad. We're going to have to find a different way, and someone else needs to look after this person because we just don't have the right energy. Or a family member doesn't understand the importance of not saying, "Don't you remember, Dad? We talked about that. We just talked about that. Don't you remember?" So the kinds of skills that people really need in order to make communication work well. So, caregiver factors cannot overemphasize. So to touch on this is just a simple meme, you can find it anywhere on the internet, but it's really great, which is never argue, instead agree. And the biggest thing is, whatever happens is let's just agree and then we'll get to it later, right? It's not that important. Okay, okay. Never reason. So logic, we use tons of logic to try and explain to somebody why we should do this. And their ability to use logic and their judgment is often so impaired, it's better to actually divert and talk about other things or distract. Never shame, so you shouldn't behave that way, that's a horrible way to behave. Instead, distract. Never lecture, instead reassure. Never say remember, instead reminisce with people about what they can recall, which is the distant past. Often they do better with that. Never say I told you, instead repeat. And never say you can't, do what you can. And don't command or demand. It's a huge issue. Don't condescend, instead encourage and praise. People need to hear the things they're doing really well. We don't pay attention to that. Never force, instead reinforce. And so just a handy but very important sort of part about communicating with people with dementia. So that's question 2B, right? So that's the wheel, right? That's good. Question 3 is, okay, that's nice. So we've got a lot of important information that we found from this conversation. Now again, we went into it in a lot of detail. But what do we do? So we talked about the 3 I's in question 3. So what are the interventions? So there'll be some things that really are very medical. There'll be some things that are medication related. There'll be referrals that need to happen. That's where you sort of put that part of the care plan. But then this big part is, how do we shift our interactions in the moment to make things work well? And that's where the Amandas and the people who are really good at sort of, once we've got a lot of good information, putting it together in a way that everybody can understand it and make it happen. And then how do we share that information? It's sharing the information, especially in an acute care facility or in a residential care facility. How do we make sure that everybody has read this and everybody understands it? And and so that requires the leadership, right? And a plan. So how do you actually build this into day-to-day work?
Pieces with the team, can be done in a nursing station. So as Carol said,
If there's a safety huddle, if you have a difficult situation, you can gather everybody together and just very quickly dash down some ideas that at least get you thinking in an organized way for your next steps. So, and over on against the wall there, you'll see the pieces sort of map that gets filled out during those conversations. So it captures all the ideas as they rapidly come out. Because part of the deal is, we were talking about the fact that the wisdom's in the room a lot of the time. So, You know, it's about picking the brains of people who are just on, you know, getting things done mode. Like, so sometimes it's about stopping and just gathering all that wisdom and going through it in an organized way, and you capture ideas that otherwise would not have been captured for the group. So that's what makes it a P.I.E.C.E.S conversation as opposed to just a P.I.E.C.E.S assessment on a piece of paper, right? The richness is in the conversation.